Before jumping into it, I would like to introduce myself. So my name is Tim Carey. I'm developer advocate at Algolia. And you can find me online under the name Pixelastic on GitHub, Twitter, anywhere. Just by show of hand, who here knows about Algolia? I know it's written over there, but except from that? Yeah, OK, mostly half the room. I will just quickly explain what we do just to give you a bit more complex about what I'm talking about a search engine. It's because at Algolia, basically, we are building a search API. So that's what we do. You send data to our API, then we give you an endpoint you can access through our API clients. That will give you, you send a few keywords, and we will reply with the most relevant result, matching those keywords. You might have used this already if you've used Yarn. And I'm talking about the NPM search, not the actual crochet you've seen in the previous talk. If you've used the search on Yarn, it's powered by Algolia behind the scenes. And we think that search is not only about making the best algorithm to find the relevant result as quickly as possible, but it's also all the UX part and how you present your results to your users. You don't want your users to be frustrated by your search, and you want them to have the most enjoyable experience finding your data. But in addition to that, we also believe that something that is maybe even more important than UX, it's DX. It's the developer experience. We are an API, so we know that people that will be using us will be people like you, developers, and we want to make your experience as enjoyable as possible when you are integrating Algolia into your project. That's why we have API clients in many different languages and frameworks. And that's also why a few months ago, 1st of April, we released our CSS API client. So it was a breakthrough. No one in the industry ever thought of doing a CSS API client. And there's a few reasons why. But still, on the 1st of April, we announced our CSS API client. It was the first API client that was not even calling the API. If you open the console on your browser, you would see that there is no calls made to the API. The whole search was actually coded inside a single CSS file. It means that it was working offline, that you did not even need JavaScript to run it, and also that it had the best of all the features of CSS. It was compatible with flexbox. So at that point in the talk, you're all wondering, what the hell is it talking about? Does not make any sense. And you would be right, because it was all a joke. It was for the 1st of April. We just released this April Fool's joke, telling everyone about how we made something absolutely incredible. We wrote a blog post announcing the official release. It was posted on Product Hunt. We did a website for it with a live demo of how it worked. The goal was really to make it look real enough so people start wondering if it was real or not. And if you go on algolia.com/CSS, there's a button you can click on that will bring you to a live demo to actually try this. And this is what the demo looks like. And we try to make it as convincing as possible so people really think it was possible to do a search engine in CSS. So what we did was taking the list of the Algolia employees at that time, so it was about 100%, and do this search just like you would do with the regular API. You type, and results are displayed instantly as you type. It handles highlighting of what you've typed. It handles typo-tolerance, so if you search for Niolas instead of Nicolas, it would still find it. You could define synonyms, and there's a way to filter the results by clicking on the team the person is part of. So it's many of the features the API really does, but this time we make it just with CSS. And I know I've been telling you it's just CSS, but really, can you do something as complex as a search engine with a language as simple as CSS? You should not underestimate CSS. CSS is an awesome language that has no variables, no functions, no conditions, no loops, no regular expressions. Well, it has none of the features you would expect from any other programming language. But the thing is you should not focus on what CSS cannot do, but you have to understand what CSS is good at and really focus on its strengths. And if there is something CSS is doing really, really well, it's selectors. you can select almost anything with CSS. CSS does not work alone. You need to have an HTML file on the side. And even if the HTML file is really big and non-semantic and it's really ugly, with CSS you will be able to target what you want. You can target stuff by the class name, by the tag, an ID, by the value of a specific attribute, or even by where the element is in the DOM based on its parents, grandparents, or its siblings. So that's really the strength of CSS, and I knew I had to focus on that if I wanted to really use the language for what it's good at. And that's it. You have a big garbage HTML, and with CSS you're able to target only the elements you're interested in. That's the strength of CSS, selecting only relevant items from a large pool of choices. And when you think about this definition, it's pretty much the same definition as a search engine. When you're searching for something, you have a lot of potential results, but you're only interested in the ones that are relevant to your query. So I knew there was something to do to use CSS as a search engine. The way it works, the core trick, is actually made of 3 simple tricks. If you've done CSS, I'm pretty sure you've used each of those tricks individually. It's basic CSS stuff. But the big trick is actually combining them into something different. So I will show you the 3 individual tricks, then we will combine them, and then we will go deeper and deeper into other parts of CSS and what you can do with it. The first one is just selecting something based on the value of an attribute. I have 2 divs with a value, an attribute of foo with a value of bar and bars. And here I just say, okay, the div where foo equal bar should have a green background. And it just selects this one. It's basic, just selecting through an attribute. The second one are pseudo-elements. In CSS, you can add pseudo-elements before or after that lets you add textual content to an HTML element, even if the content was not here in the actual HTML markup. So in that case, I have 2 divs. One has an ID of foo, and I say, okay, select foo, and before I add in the content a lovely heart like this. So there's the heart here, even if it was not in the original HTML. You can add content to elements through CSS. And the last one is the tilde selector, which is this little wave you have like this that lets you select an element that is after another one. So in that case, I have 4 elements with 3 different classes, foo, bar, baz, and foo. And I say, let me select all the foo that are after a bar. So this one does not match because it's not after a bar. Those 2 are not foo. And this is the only one. It's a foo after a bar, and you can see that I don't care if there is another element in between. The tilde selector lets you select an element after another, even if there are other elements in between. So those are the 3 tricks. Now let's combine them. This is the base markup. I have an input, so it's, that will be a search field where you will enter your query with the value of team, so it's written team here. And after that, you have an empty div. And the CSS rule is, let's select the input that has a value of team, and then select the result that is just after, and add in its content the value team carry. Which means that when this input has a value of team, the element after is filled with the text team carry. And if I type something different in the input, it does not match, so nothing is displayed. That's the basics of how we will build that. Based on the value of the input, we add a different content somewhere else in the page. But there is an issue with that, is that when you load the page for the first time, your search bar is empty, because you expect people to type something, but you don't want to pre-fill it. So the value is set to an empty string. And so this line is when you load the page, and so I try to type my name, and nothing is happening. Why? Nothing is happening because CSS is actually reading the value that is in the HTML when the page loads. When you type something in an input, it does not update the actual value of the HTML element. it updates a dynamic value that can only be read by JavaScript. So how do you do in that case? I needed to have this dynamic value move to the actual HTML attribute. I used JavaScript. And I know I said there was no JavaScript involved, but I just want to remind you that the goal of this is to make people believe in something that does not really exist. And the best way to make people believe in something that's not true is just to lie to them. So that's what I did. I said there is no JavaScript involved. That was not true, but no one checked. But to be fair, there's not much JavaScript either. That's the only JavaScript that is used here. It's you might not see it clearly. I will share the slides after the talk, but it's an on-input event handler on this element, so it will be triggered every time the value changes. It will read the value through JavaScript and reassign it through set attribute to the HTML. So in plain English, it says, whenever the value changes, set the value to the value, which seems stupid, but it's actually needed to move the dynamic value from the JavaScript world to the static value that can be read into the CSS world. Well, that's the only JavaScript that will be in this project, but that's definitely needed. That lets you have dynamic updates of what you actually type. And this is how it works. I started adding new values. So if you search for Tim, you have Tim Carey displayed. If you search for Jessica, you have Jessica West displayed, and Daniel, you have Daniel as well. And you can see that it even works whatever the case. So if you have lowercase, uppercase, a mix of both, it's because I'm using a lowercase I here, which means the match should be case insensitive. So you add many of these, and it starts to match. Except that does not completely work, because here I'm only matching on Tim. It should be written Jessica, yeah. It should only matching on Tim. So when I type Ty, it does not match. Here I'm typing Dan, and it should only match on Daniel. Does not matching either. So there's something that's not right. When you're doing a search, you should show to your users result as soon as you have a relevant result. You shouldn't wait for them to type the word completely. You should, if there is a match for Dan, you should display the match for Dan right now. So that's when I realized that search engine was a bit more complex than my naive approach here, and I needed to better understand how it was working internally. Fortunately for me, I'm working in a company where we do build a search engine, so all I had to do was turn to one of my coworkers and ask them to explain how it was working. And the thing you have to understand is every search engine, and it's true for Algolia, it's also true for Elasticsearch, Lucene, or Solar, is made of two parts. You have the searching part and the indexing part. The searching part is the one you know the most. It's the one you see when you're typing something in a search bar. When you're typing something in a search bar, you want the answer to this question. What will I find if I tap Tim, for example? But when you are building the search engine, you have to have a very different perspective. And you have to ask yourself a very different question. It's, what should a user type to find a specific result? It means that for every potential result you have in your database, what are the strings that user should type that will yield this result? And in my case, I wanted people to be able to find employees based on their first name, last name, and job title. So it means if they search for Tim or Kerry or developer or advocate, they should be able to find me. It means I have to split that into different words and split those words into what are called n-grams. N-grams are the string sequences that build up to the final word. It means that people should be able to find me if they only type car or dev or advoc. Every single part should yield me as a result. So what do? You just add them all to your CSS. You generate them, and now every single one of them is matching. So you type car or car, and it's working. And you have to think that you're doing that for the first name, the last name, the job title of 100 different employees. So the CSS file is really big. And it's just the beginning. Because I realized search is full of edge cases. In this one, I just wanted to fix some of the main edge cases, not all of them that we handle in the API, but the most common one, which were, how do you handle accented characters? I have this coworker, his name's Sébastien, but it's spelled with an accent, and I want people to be able to find him even if they don't have the accented character on their keyboard. So it means I create a new n-gram with Sébastien with an accent and Sébastien without the accent. You have compound words. Marie-Laure should be found by searching for Marie or for Laure. So you don't only have to split on spaces, but also on dashes. You have to handle synonyms. My coworker Sylvain is better known on GitHub under his GitHub handle Redux. So you need to be able to find him through a synonym. So you add a new n-gram for, in addition to his name, last name, you add for his GitHub handle. And you have the typo-tolerance. So my coworker Rémi-Christophe Schermesser, Rémi-Christophe has a last name that you usually do not spell correctly on the first try. You might forget an H somewhere or an S somewhere else, but you should not expect your users to be able to type stuff correctly when they're searching. They might not know how Schermesser is spelled, but they should still be able to find it. Or when you're looking for a movie and you don't know how Arnold Schwarzenegger is supposed to be spelled, you should still be able to find the actor. So what you do here is, what I did is generating all the potential variations, not all, but most of them, potential variation on the name. And like if you spell Schermesser missing an H, I just add the name missing an H to the n-grams. I also add the name missing an S to the n-grams. And yes, it will generate many, many more lines into my CSS file. And Rémi-Christophe is very interesting because it's a mega combo in that he has an accent, compound words, and in real life, no one ever calls him Rémi-Christophe Schermesser in real life. We all call him RCS, so he also needed a synonym. So Rémi-Christophe was my, I was doing unit testing to make sure everything was working in my project. So Rémi-Christophe was my fixture. If it was working for Rémi-Christophe, everything was working. And now we'll get back to a bit more CSS and what CSS is usually used for, meaning making stuff pretty on the web. So as a reminder, this is the final layout we want. You type stuff and you have various results displayed with their picture, name, last name, job title, and when you hover on it, you have a fun fact about the person. The small change here is that now I want to display several results and not just only one. So I will change the markup slightly, and instead of having only one empty div where I add the result, I create a div with 100 empty divs inside. It's because I have 100 different employees, so I will create a placeholder for each of them. And I will pre-fill their value here in the CSS. So the result one will always be Jason, the second will always be Josh, and the third will always be Jonas. I hide them all by default, so when you go on the page, it's pre-filled, but you cannot see anything. And then it's only on specific query that I will display block to make them visible. So when you search for Joe, Jason should still be hidden, but result number 2 and result number 3, which are Josh and Jonas, should now be displayed. That's how you play without you display several results. Everything is hidden by default, and you only display the ones that are matching the query. But you now need to style it to make it pretty. And this is one result. This is Gianluca, one of my coworkers, and I need to add his picture, fun fact on over, name, and job title, all of that with an empty div, because I have nothing in the HTML. So for the picture, I'm actually using a background image, and I'm using an online service that is named Cloudinary. If some of you know about it, it's really awesome. It's like a CDN, but specifically for images. So it targets your original image on your website, and it goes through the Cloudinary CDN, but you can add on the fly image transformation. So in my case, I said, this is the original image on my website, and I want to resize it, make it black and white, and round it like this. And all my images were coming from different sources, from GitHub, from the website, from a Gravatar. But in the end, by sending them through Cloudinary, they all look similar. So I have a consistent UI of my results. Now to display the name. So for the fun fact, I used an after that was displayed on over. And for the name and job title, I had to display them. I wanted to display them on 2 different lines, but I was stuck with only one pseudo element the before because I already used the after for the fun fact. But how do you add a new line in a generated content like this? You cannot add HTML because you can only add text into CSS content. So I needed to find another way to add 2 different lines. Fortunately, in CSS, there is a special character named \A that will actually add a new line. But like everything in HTML, when you add a new line in your HTML, it does not mean it will be displayed as a new line. You need a specific CSS property to actually say a new line in the markup is equal to a visual new line. And that CSS property is whitespace spray. So now this gives me 2 different lines. And now that I have 2 different lines, I can use the pseudo selector first line to select the first one and make it bold. So with only one pseudo element, I was able to have actually 2 different elements that I could style differently. So that's what the name is bolded, and the second line is a bit smaller. And it was starting to work. I was trying the algorithm, and I was typing a random string, and I typed ST, and I got all those results. And I was like, okay, it works. I have Steven, that's the ST, it's matching here, and then Alexander, okay, Stanislavski, it's matching there. David Strader, okay, but Vincent Voyer, Maxime Locqueville, Mathieu Dumont, I don't know why it's matching. And I was like, oh, maybe something is wrong in my algorithm. Maybe I did something wrong. Actually, nothing was wrong on my side, but it was because I was forgetting something really important that you do in the UX of the search is you have to explain to your users why a specific result is here or not. And here, I'm not explaining why those results are matching. The easiest way to explain to your users why a specific result is here is to use highlighting. If you go on Google, you can see the highlighting. It's really subtle. They just do a small bolding on the search keywords, but your mind subconsciously understands that, okay, I understand why this is matching. So I needed to add some highlighting to my CSS search engine. And highlighting does not have to be a bright yellow on the matched keywords. It's just slight underline or slight bold, it's enough. What I wanted is, I'm looking for Gian, for Gianluca, and I want Gian to be bolded here. But once again, this is my content. I have everything on one line, and I still cannot add any HTML. So how do I highlight a specific part? Well, I cheat. I just generate my own custom font that contains all the regular characters plus all the bolded glyphs in the same font. But I'm adding those glyphs in a specific namespace of the UTF-8 that is called the private use area. You can put whatever glyphs you want there, and you're sure they will not. Okay, they will not overwrite anything in any language. And then you can target the specific characters in CSS by targeting them by their code point. So it's \A647. It's actually a capital bolded G here. And this is the lowercase I here, and so on. And you have to do that for every single matches. So if you were searching for Jian Lu, you would have the same rule, but with 2 different characters there. And you have to do that for every single one of the 100 employees. So the resulting file size is about 9 megabytes for all of that. Highly minified and compressed everywhere. But it works. And now in my result, I understand why the elements are here. It's because all of those guys are full stack engineers, and that's why it's matching. So I'm changing the perception of the user from, oh, this search engine is not working, the results are not the one I want, to, yeah, okay, I understand. And I actually understand that here I have 3 buckets. I have the matches in the first name that are more important than matches in the last name, that are more important than matches in the job title. So you can see that everything is by order of importance. So it means you have to reorder your results. Because by default, I said that the first element was always a specific employee and the second element was another employee. Here, I have to make sure Steven is first, Alex is second, and so on. So I have to reorder my results without changing the HTML markup. So I still have the same markup, but I want to have result 4 coming first and result 8 coming second, for example. And that's the easiest part of the whole talk. I'm just using flexbox. And if your element is in the flex context, the flex one here, you can just use the order property with the value, and they will be automatically reordered in that way. So result 4 is number 1, result 8 is number 2, and result 15 is number 3 for the query ST. And you change the reordering for every potential query based on which one is matching the most. So I haven't written all the CSS by hand. There's a Ruby script that does that. If you want to try it, actually I made it as a command line. Just pass it your JSON file as input, and it will generate the huge CSS file as output. Which lead me to this page. While I was doing that, I was debugging it a lot. So I was refreshing the page over and over again to try my CSS rules. And I was always coming back to this page, which is what we call the empty query. When you go to a website and you have to search, by default, there is nothing written in the search bar. It's empty query. There is no query here. But no query does not mean you should not display any results. On the other hand, if there is no query, you should display as many results as you could to tell your users, this is the data set you can search into. So here, if there is no query, I display the whole list of employees. And they are displayed from an arbitrary order, which is their date of arrival in the company. So the 2 founders, and then the first employee, and so on. But every time I was debugging, I was greeted with the same page over and over again of same faces, which is not really representing who we are today, because it's not because people were there at the beginning that they should be more important in the company. Everyone is helping in the company. So we wanted something that would not have this hierarchy feeling. It means on the first load, I wanted the results to be displayed randomly. And how do you do random in CSS? Well, you don't. You do it in JavaScript. but wait. It's not JavaScript that is executed on the front end this time. I don't know if you've heard of this other awesome service that is called webtask.io. It's a mix of the gist of GitHub and Heroku. It means that you just go to their website, you type your Node.js code in an online code editor like this, you press save, and you have a URL you can call that will execute this code. Completely free. So I wrote a bit of JavaScript that just outputs CSS and puts the order in a random order every time I call this. So when you go to the demo, you have one huge CSS file that has all the generic stuff I'm talking about, and a smaller one that is actually calling here and defining a different random order every time you call it. And that's the result. Every time you load the page, you have a different set of people displayed with no hierarchy involved. And I will finish with a few learnings from this experience that I want to share with you, especially about performances. Selectors by ID are really fast compared to selectors like endschild. When I did this project for the first time, I wanted to have the HTML as pure as possible, meaning no classes, no IDs, just selecting everything through endschild, so people looking at the source code would say, oh, what is this magic? But turns out it's really, really slow. When I was typing, I could wait 2 to 3 seconds to have stuff displayed for the time for everything to catch up. I changed all the selectors to ID and it was instant. So there's really difference in performance between the two. Also, because I'm repeating my rules thousands of times, every time I have to repeat the selector of a specific element, if this selector is really long, it will be repeated over and over again, and the final file size will be really, really big. So instead of all the selector I show in the examples, like input or result 10, result 12, I used identifiers with only 1 or 2 letters, which helps divide the file size a lot when you're dealing with thousands of repetitions. Same, sometimes I had to use important in my CSS rules to override previous rules. But when you repeat important thousands of times, it's taking a lot of the file size. So I used the trick to over-specify an element. This selector, what it says is select the element with an ID of R12 that also has an attribute of ID, which is, by definition, it has. So it will target exactly the same element, except that this one will be more specific than the one without the ID. It will target exactly the same thing, but it will be slightly more specific, so you can override your rules without using important. And the last one is that there is a maximum number of selectors one can put in a specific rule. So it's when you say selector 1, selector 2, and so on. This is the maximum number of Chrome. If you add more than that, Chrome will just refuse to parse anything after. So, of course, I'll file the bug to Chrome, saying that it's not possible. Well, come on, guys, what are you doing? With the test case, and they managed to reproduce the issue. And they say, oh, yeah, that's weird. Let's see how Firefox is doing. Oh, same issue on Firefox, except it's not exactly the same number. But they came back to me and told me, yeah, you know, we won't fix that, because if someone is crazy enough to go to that number, even if we double or triple it, it won't solve the issue. So there's actually a workaround. You just have to put one less selector than the limit and split it in several definitions, and it works. To minify my CSS, I'm using the awesome minifier called Clean CSS, and I filed a bug over there saying that, oh, they should add a rule to automatically split, and they actually did. So if you use Clean CSS, you won't ever have this bug. I don't even know why you would have this bug anyway. But the last advice I want to give you is to don't listen to me. And never follow random performance trick you've seen in a conference somewhere, because it's really dependent on the project you're working on. Everything I have been doing here is not regular CSS you would do every day. So ID is fast and style is slow. Yes, it's true on my project, but on any other project, the difference will be really negligible. So if style is easier for maintainability, use style. Same here. Don't use small names like that does not mean anything. Use real name that really explain what is your intent for your coworkers. Here it's the same. So if already you are using important in your CSS rules, I'm pretty sure your coworkers hate you. But if in addition of that you are hiding that before something like this, they will just want to kill you. And for the last one, well, I think you will never have this issue, at least I hope. And I will finish on what I personally learned doing that, is that impossible only means you haven't found the solution yet. When we started doing this project, we just wanted to pretend that we managed to do a CSS API client. We wanted to give the illusion to user that it was actually working. We did not intend for it to go that far, but the more we worked on it, the more we said, oh, can we do random? Oh yeah, we could do it that way. Can we do highlighting? Oh, maybe yes, we could do it that way. And in the end, we started wanting to pretend that it was working, but now it's pretending really, really well that it's working. So if you have any ideas of how this could be actually used, let me know. It's still 10 megabytes for 100 people, but it does work. And that's it for me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you very much.